A small puncture on your hand, that's all it is. A thin line of broken skin, barely bleeding. You wash it, you move on, you have no idea that somewhere underneath that skin, something has already started moving. Not blood, not infection in the way you're used to thinking about it, something slower, something patient. This is the story of what happens inside a human body after a rabies exposure, from the first hour to the final one. It's rare, it's almost always preventable. But once it isn't, it becomes one of the only viral infections on Earth with a fatality rate close to 100%. You are a composite of real documented cases, the kind virologists and emergency physicians have studied for decades. You've been bitten by an animal, most often a dog in the regions where this still happened, or a bat in places like North America, where bat bites are so small they can go completely unnoticed. You didn't think much of it, maybe you didn't even see a wound. Bat teeth can leave marks smaller than a pinprick. That detail matters more than almost anything else in this story. Within the first few hours, the rabies virus is already at work, but not in your bloodstream. It doesn't travel the way most infections do. Instead, it heads for the nearest peripheral nerve endings near the bite site and begins moving inward toward your spinal cord and brain at a slow crawl of roughly 1 to 2 centimeters a day. This is why the location of a bite matters so much. A bite on the face or neck is close to the brain, so the virus arrives fast, sometimes within days. A bite on the ankle or foot means a much longer runway, sometimes months, because the virus has so much further to travel. For most of that time, you feel completely normal. This is the part people don't expect. Rabies has one of the longest incubation periods of any human virus, typically somewhere between 3 weeks and 3 months, though documented cases exist stretching past a year. During this stretch, the virus isn't attacking your organs or triggering fever. It's traveling nerve fiber to nerve fiber, invisible to blood tests, invisible to how you feel day to day. You go back to your normal life, you forget about the bite, that's the ticking clock, and is ticking in silence. Eventually the virus reaches your spinal cord, and from there, your brain. This is when the incubation period ends and the prodromal stage begins, usually lasting 2 to 10 days. The first symptoms rarely look like rabies at all: a headache, a low fever, a general sense of fatigue, the kind you'd blame on a bad week. Then comes a detail that has helped identify this disease in real cases for over a century. Pain, tingling, or itching right at the original bite site, even if it healed weeks or months earlier. Researchers call this paresthesia, and it happens because the virus, now replicating heavily in the nerve tissue near your spine, is irritating the very pathway it traveled through. Your body's own nervous system is telling you where the war began. As the virus spreads through your central nervous system, it reaches the brain itself, and this is where rabies becomes one of the most feared diseases in medical history. In what's called the furious form seen in roughly 80% of symptomatic cases, the brain's limbic system and brainstem become inflamed and disrupted, and you begin experiencing hyperactivity, agitation, and extreme sensory sensitivity. Light hurts, sound hurts, and this is where one of rabies' strangest and most specific symptoms appears: hydrophobia, a violent involuntary spasm of your throat muscles triggered by the mere sight, sound, or thought of water. It isn't fear in the psychological sense. It's a brainstem reflex, misfiring because the virus has disrupted the neural circuits that control swallowing and breathing. Drinking becomes physically impossible, not because you're afraid, but because your own throat refuses to cooperate. In the other 20% of cases, what's called paralytic rabies, there's no agitation at all. Instead, your muscles weaken progressively, starting near the bite site and spreading a slower and quieter version of the same underlying process. Both forms end the same way. Once symptoms begin, in almost every documented case in medical history, the outcome is fatal, typically within 1 to 2 weeks of symptom onset, and this is what makes rabies almost unique among human viruses. It's nearly always preventable, but virtually never survivable once neurological symptoms appear. There have been a small number of documented survivors, and they matter here because they reveal how the story usually ends. The most famous case is a teenager in Wisconsin in 2004, treated with an experimental approach that became known as the Milwaukee Protocol, involving an induced coma meant to give her immune system time to respond while protecting her brain from further damage. She survived, becoming one of the first known unvaccinated rabies patients to recover, but researchers who've studied the handful of survivors since note the protocol's success rate remains extremely low, and most attempts since have failed. For nearly everyone else in the historical record, once those first neurological symptoms appear, the timeline from headache to death is measured in days, not weeks. What makes this story matter beyond one bite or one virus is what it reveals about the relationship between exposure and outcome in human biology. The entire trajectory, healed wound to fatal encephalitis, is decided not in the moment symptoms appear, but in the days immediately after exposure, when a rabies vaccine and immunoglobulin can still intercept the virus before it reaches nervous tissue. Once the virus crosses into your central nervous system, medicine currently has almost no way to stop it. That gap between what can be done in the first hours and what can be done once symptoms begin is one of the sharpest lines in all of infectious disease. It's also a reminder of something easy to forget about your own body. How much of what happens to you physiologically is already decided long before you feel anything at all. The itch at a bite site weeks after it healed. A headache that feels like nothing. Your nervous system doesn't announce danger the moment it arrives. Sometimes it stays quiet for months, moving at its own pace, long before you ever learn what's already underway inside you.